Hello, dear viewers. Today I'm going to talk about what's really happening in Ethiopia, especially in the relationship between the federal government or the central government and the Tigray liberation fighters. They call themselves actually the Tigray Defense Force. Um, you might heard about this event from the Western media or from different media outlets. But what is really going on the ground? This is the biggest question. And I think you really deserve to know the right thing. And just to start mentioning the few points concerning this writing, the situation or the tension between the center and the periphery, or the central government and the regional government, uh, began 3 years before, that is in 2018. At the time, the Ethiopian people were resisting the ruling party, which was called EPRD. That party was totally dominated by TPLF, or what we call now the Tigrayan political elites, which are now leading the Tigray Defense Force. So at the time, the resistance movement from the public pushed or better to say, better relegated the Tigrayan forces into the periphery region. So the party began reforming itself, then exclude the Tigrayan part, and then rebrand itself. So this is what was happening on the political sphere. So that those elites from Tigray start to think that they are excluded, they are pushed back to the periphery. Then they start to mobilize their own constituency, who are found in Tigray. And Tigray is somehow very far from the center, and next to Tigray is a state called Eritrea. So once the political movement and the change within the politics, um, pushed the Tigrayan elites into the periphery, and other important reforms were also introduced in this country. For example, uh, there was Tigray conglomerates in Addis, uh, for example, in Metek, which was actually a state-owned enterprise, and it was totally dominated by Tigray generals. And once the political reform was supplemented by different economic reforms, so such type of inefficient state or public enterprises were reformed and their leadership were changed, so that their economic interest was highly affected. So most of their leaders were removed from office, and those who involved in corruption were held accountable. Um, having this type of changes, so first they were politically marginalized, and then they were economically pushed into the periphery. And then once they concentrate in Tigray, they start to mobilize huge amount of foot soldiers. So they start to recruit soldiers, they start to arm them, they start to militarize themselves. And they were resistant to the decisions and the actions taken by the central government. That was the long process that happened in the past 3 years. So a year before, in a matter of single day, they attacked the National Defense Force. And once they attacked the National Defense Force, the Ethiopian Defense Force was forced to wage a counterattack against the Tigrayan forces. So their plan was actually, as they said, to come to Addis and to remove the Abiy administration. And the war was not going as they were planning, because the central government easily assembled itself and for counterattack and captured the capital Mekelle in a matter of 3 weeks. But before that, they were trying to regionalize the war by firing a missile to Asmara, um, to Gondar and Bahardar as well. But they were not successful as well. One thing that we have to remember is that even before the beginning of the war, Ethiopian elites from the economy, from the society, from the politics, different types of elders tried to negotiate between the central government and the Tigrayan elites, and they were they were not ready to accept. I think most viewers know the person, athlete Haile Gebrselassie. He was one of the elders. There was also other religious leaders who tried to negotiate between these two elites. I mean, two power centers. So after 3 weeks of counterattack, the central government easily captured Mekelle, and after 8 months of occupation, finally the central government took a unilateral ceasefire. It's after that 8 months that they have got the chance to um, prepare themselves for another new type of attack against the central government. They recruit lots of Tigrayan youths and children uh, to mobilize for new form of attack against the government. So they tried to start or to launch an attack in the western um, direction towards Sudan, but that direction was totally controlled by the central government. And they also tried to move to eastern direction, that's towards Afar and possibly towards Djibouti. That area was also totally defended by the Afars and the Ethiopian government. So the only way out for them to come to the center was towards its southern neighbors, that is Wollo area of Amhara regional state. So they mobilized their army and they tried to capture the northern Wollo areas like Sakota, Lalibela, Woldia, Koko, and others. It is now at the stage that there is high level of confrontation between the government and those Tigray Defense Force. So this is the real story. I mean, it began as a political process. Finally, they emerged as resistant to the Ethiopians' demand for political reform. The Ethiopians were expecting to have strong democracy, accountable government, and electoral political leadership. This was totally banned. I mean, this was totally it was totally unacceptable in the past 30 years in which they were leading the country. This only introduced in these 2 and 3 years. By now, Ethiopia is uh, trying to somehow practice democracy. There is elected government. There is some sort of improving human rights institutions. There is some sort of improved democratic institutions and the like. So I can say it is a war against all these democratic efforts. It's a war against all these democratic ambitions of the Ethiopian people. What's most surprising is that the role of the West, US and other European countries are now against the Ethiopian government, but they claim that they always support democratic ambitions and democratic activities. Uh, if they really concerned about democracy, then why they support TPLF than the Ethiopian people and their elected government? I think this is a question that you have to answer.